Good morning and welcome to this next series that we are doing in our study of the entire Bible with discipleship as the focus. I'm John Henderson and I'm pleased to be with you today and hope that we all receive a blessing from what we're about to look at and about to study. We are today beginning a look at the book of Leviticus. Now, the book of Leviticus is the third book of Moses. That makes it the third book of the Jewish Torah, the third book of the 5 books of Moses, which sometimes are called the Pentateuch. 5 books. It comes after Exodus, and you will remember that the events have taken us now to the people are all gathered and camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses in Exodus has been up on Mount Sinai and has received the 10 Commandments and God's law. Prior to that, the Israelites have endured 400 years of life in Egypt and been redeemed by the Exodus, both from the oppression by the Egyptians and relief from the exposure to the Egyptian gods. Now, this is very important in considering where we are spiritually with the Israelites and how they view things. Their history as children of Abraham has been virtually entirely spent for 400 years, almost countless generations, living right in the busy cultural center of Egypt. Egypt, a very idolatrous with myriads of gods and goddesses for different purposes, shifting during that period of time, depending on who were the high priests and who was the Pharaoh and what his religious emphasis was. So we have people who are coming into a very different situation. They have now been, after being liberated by God with Moses from the Egyptians, they've crossed the Red Sea, and you remember about that. Now they have journeyed down to the foot of Mount Sinai, which is in the Arabian Peninsula down near the Red Sea. And they have been there for about 3 months, and already the 10 Commandments have been given. Now, they will remain there, as we shall see, for about 9 more months. So by the time we leave Mount Sinai, the Israelites will have been there in camp for approximately 1 year. Now, the 10 Commandments have just recently, in this time frame, been handed down very dramatically, as you remember. But remember this: Moses went up onto the mountain covered with a cloud to receive the 10 Commandments, but he was gone for 40 days. Now, all of us know that it wouldn't likely take 40 days for the Lord to give to Moses the 10 Commandments. And we know that for sure because in Exodus, because of the drama of the golden calf and the drama of the rendering of the 10 Commandments, it's not noticed that a good portion of Exodus is what else God gave to Moses during those 40 days. Rather detailed instructions and laws and commandments. Now we come to Leviticus, which is they're still at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Leviticus is an enormous expansion of these detailed, particular commandments, particular judgments, particular instructions in many, many areas, not just of religious life, but in regular civilian life, if you will. In fact, it is so full of details and that is so full of these details and laws with so much clarity that it has sometimes been called the Book of Rules. Now, there is an interesting little aside that I want us to look at. And Mallory, if you could look at the two names for Leviticus. Leviticus actually has two biblical names. The first is the Hebrew name. Leviticus would have been written by Moses in Hebrew. The title in the Hebrew Torah for this book that we are examining and studying is Vayikra. Vayikra is a Hebrew word, and it means, and he called. Well, the Hebrew scholars who assigned the name Vayikra to Leviticus did that because it was at the very beginning and signified what it was, the book was about. Now, over 1,000 years later, the Old Testament, including the Torah, was translated by a very select group of Hebrew scholars into Greek. Now, Greek is not a language that anybody in the biblical lexicon at this point know anything about. We're going to get to that in our study. But when it was converted or translated to Greek, the way the Greek scholarship denoted what a book was titled was what the bulk of the book was about. So you see on the screen, you've got Vayikra, which means, and he called. That means, and God called, and he called. He was calling to righteousness and holiness, and that was the emphasis of the book. Leviticus, however, is a Greek word which summarizes the bulk of the content of the Bible, of that book, and it means matters pertaining to Levites. So, a lot of the words are about the Levites becoming priests, but that's the reason that you've got a little bit of an interesting thing that goes on with how the title and the perception of the book is. It is so detailed in rules and regulations in all areas of life that, did you know that during the ancient Hebrew period, for virtually thousands of years, Leviticus, as detailed as it is, was the first book that the Hebrew teachers taught to the children? Now, it wasn't because it was so important for the children to know all about the Levites and the priests and how they were appointed. No, it was because of the emphasis of what God is doing in Leviticus, which is calling the people to be holy and righteous, as we will get to in a moment. Leviticus, then, as you will see, is a great turning point in both time and the message of the founding of the Judeo-Christian religion, as God reveals himself to the chosen people, but as you also can see, he was also revealing himself over time to the world. Leviticus, then, is God's call to his people to become holy, as God is holy. Now think about that for just a moment. We haven't seen anything like that in the development of this Judeo-Christian religion. God is calling in Leviticus for the people to become like him. Now take a quick flashback to Genesis. Remember, we had only just been created when God uttered the words, "And let us create man in our own image." Keep that thought for a moment, because now we have got thousands of years later, God is outlining in Leviticus how he is beginning that process of showing us how we can truly be, think, act like him. That process begins in the book of Leviticus and continues to this very day. How is the Lord accomplishing his call to holiness? By moving in with his chosen people. From the creation, you will remember that God has been pretty distant from the earth, distant from now what we think of as his called holy people. Well, one of the reasons for that distance is up until this point, there haven't been a substantial number of people. This whole process that we're talking about now began with Abraham, with God's covenant with Abraham. And remember, his covenant, stated simply, is worship me as your only sovereign God. Trust me and obey me, and I will bless you. Well, Abraham was a small family. It has now grown, his descendants have now grown to between 1 and 3 million people. And now, for the first time, these people have been summoned by God to the exact same covenant that he had with Abraham. Remember, right before Moses went up to the top of Mount Sinai, up in the clouds and the smoke and the fire, to meet with God and receive the Ten Commandments and other instructions from him, the people went through a purification process, which they equated at that point with a cleansiness, a becoming physically clean. And so what we have is now, for basically the first time, the people have been included in this process of accomplishing what God wants to accomplish. He first started out, God did, walking in the Garden of Eden with Adam. Well, as we recall, that did not turn out very well. That's where original sin started, and what original sin is the sin of disobeying God to the point of always choosing self-interest over what God's purpose is and what God wants. Then we had Abraham, where God had some interaction with Abraham, but not a great lot. I think of Abraham as a single purpose disciple. It was his job to receive the covenant, which would be passed down to his descendants, and the knowledge that we have a God that we can trust. And then we have Moses, who has entered into the most intense relationship with God that we have seen any glimpse of before. Moses, and a little bit like Adam, was able to talk with God about everything. But there is a difference. Moses wanted to obey God, trust God, carry out his will, even against his own interests. So he became the first prophet and the first real disciple. Now, if we could go, Mallory. So what we have now is a tabernacle has been built. And that has been added to what we have already had. It is an amazement to see the importance of what has just occurred. Imagine for a moment, you're at the foot of Mount Sinai, and we've spent months and months and months building this magnificent structure, this tent, this tabernacle for worship. I want to read to you at the end of Exodus when this had just happened. Moses had just put the fence around it, which was covered with cloth, and put the gate on. And then the tabernacle was suddenly finished. And in Exodus 40, 34, and 35, we have these words. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. the Lord has just moved in with his people. Very, very, very big and important change. Thank you.